Perfect. All right. Welcome. My name is Erin Christensen, and I'm lucky enough to be the chair-elect for the Student and Postdoc SIG at OHBM for next year. And I'd like to welcome you all to our wonderful webinar today, Navigating Academia and Parenthood. We're very excited about it because we've got an excellent panel of very diverse experiences, people who can share what it's been like trying to balance a career in academia and parenthood. So uh, I'll give a little introduction for who's here, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves as well. So we've got Dr. Saad Jbabdi, who's a father of one, professor of biomedical engineering, and senior research fellow at St Hilda's College, Oxford. We have Dr. Michele Veldsman, who's a mother of two, Director of Science and Technology for Axiomics Consulting and founder of Playroom Parenting. Dr. Kevin Aquino, who's a father of two and Chief Scientific Officer at Brainkey.ai, and Dr. Isabella Breukelaar, who's a mum of two and a postdoctoral fellow working at the Brain Dynamics Centre, Westmead Institute for Medical Research in Sydney, Australia. So a couple of Aussies and a couple of Brits here, which is very exciting. Welcome. Um, I think I'll kick things off by just asking you all to kind of go one by one. We'll start with Saad. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about your parenting experience. When did you become a father? And I guess what sort of your career has been to date.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I became a father in 2013. At the time, I was about 32 years old, and I was a postdoc already for, well, I had my PhD in 2006. And so quite a few years postdoc. I was at the time writing what was going to become my first fellowship, so my first independent fellowship, which is called Career Development Award from the MRC here in the UK, which I started in 2014. And what else did you ask? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. That answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. And then I've got Michele next.
Hi. Yeah, so I finished my PhD in 2014. That's when I graduated from Cambridge, and then I had my first child and my first postdoc 2017. No, not my first post, my second postdoc, sorry. So first child in my first postdoc in Oxford, and that was 2017. And then I had another child in 2020. I was still in Oxford, but in a different lab. And so pandemic baby. And since then, my kids are now 4 and 7. I left academia, started freelance consulting, started a startup, um, also went into biotech. So I like to say that I left academia and then left industry, and now I'm in I don't know what, but with two kids. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michele. And I'm keen to hear about that industry transition and what that was like. I have some questions about that in a minute. But Kevin, speaking of industry transition, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I completed my PhD in 2013. I had my first kid, Sabrina, in 2018. So I had a postdoc in university, then University of Nottingham, and back at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. So in 2018, I then left academia and joined the biotech industry in a startup called Brainkey.ai. Did some consulting along the way. Um, and then I had my second child in 2021. So 2022, sorry. So post-COVID baby, so to speak. Yeah, so my kids are now 7 and 2, almost 3.
Fantastic. And Isabella.
I'm, I guess, a little fresher I did my PhD in 2019, and then I had my first baby in the second year of my postdoc in 2021, so another pandemic baby, and then followed it up with my second baby who was born in 2024. So I have an 18-month-old and an almost 4-year-old. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic couple of pandemic babies.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start by asking some questions that have been pre-submitted, and then anyone in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please pop it in the chat or pop your hand up. We can put your screen on, and you're welcome to ask it yourself. So let's start off by I was wondering whether you could speak to the challenges you experienced navigating parenthood for the first time. I know that's a big question because there are a lot of challenges in navigating parenthood, but particularly in terms of academia, were there some hard conversations you had to have? Was this something that was planned, or a happy surprise? And how did you navigate that, I guess, in the context of most of you were a postdoc, I believe, when you became a parent, right? So yeah, in the context of that career position, happy for anyone to start.
I could start. Yeah, so I had my I went to Australia for my first postdoc. I was in the Florey Institute, and then I came back to Oxford, and I was only about a year into that postdoc, and was planning to have a baby. So and got pregnant fairly quickly. So timing wise, it worked quite well for me. But then I was in a postdoc that I really did not enjoy. I really didn't like the lab environment. It wasn't working for me. So on my maternity leave, of which I took 6 months, I applied for other positions. So I ended up leaving my first postdoc and into my leaving that, sorry, first postdoc in Oxford, leaving that lab and into another lab. So I interviewed during maternity leave. And then when I came back from maternity leave, it was actually into a new lab. So that was an interesting experience. And then the second baby, yeah, that was during the pandemic. Um, and I took a longer maternity leave because the first time it really was, I felt too short. Um, so that time I took a longer one and did shared parental leave with my husband. The lab I was in was super, super supportive, and I was really, really happy there. That was really great. I had no issues in terms of that. Um, Being in academia and being in that lab and speaking to my PI about it, hugely supportive. So that was a very positive experience.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Did anyone have a less positive transition? Like, or was it all quite simple? Not that that was simple. It sounded complicated changing jobs, but it's wonderful that your
I forgot to
second.
mention, yeah, I left out a few bits, which is that I on for my interview for that position, I had a newborn baby, and so I
Wow.
took her to a lab meeting, and ended up breastfeeding in the shower cubicle. So it wasn't all totally simple, but she was kicking off in this lab meeting, and I was like new to this lab, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do, so just took the baby out, and yeah, fed her, and then came back
Wow.
in. So yeah, not
Wow.
totally simple.
I also need to acknowledge that like trying to find a job and having a newborn is like I assume very unsimple and a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah,
So
that was tricky, and I was super lucky to like be able to stay in Oxford as well because we'd obviously like settled there and stuff. So yeah.
mm. Yeah, Saad.
I can share my experience, but it's not. It was actually quite nice and easy, so I'm sorry about that. My son, who's called Pixel because we are geeks, was the first 100% child from the center because my wife worked in the same imaging center as me, so it was really nice. And the first year was lovely. So colleagues were happy. Pixel was very popular amongst the colleagues. And at the time, as I said earlier, I was applying for this fellowship, and the interview was after my kid was born. And I really didn't feel stressed at all for the first time. I was like, yeah, just going there and doing the thing. I had other things in my mind. When a child is born, your priorities change, etc. So in that sense, yeah, it helped me actually. Obviously, not everything was rosy, and a year later, there were kind of issues. My wife had depression and anxiety and things like that. But overall, at least the first thing, and from the academic side of things, was uh, yeah, it wasn't too bumpy.
Mhm. How
I
much
would say, I
time?
guess,
Oh,
you go ahead.
sorry. Sorry, Isabella. I just wonder how much time you took off, Saad, and how much time your wife took off at the time.
So at the time, she took the full, I think it was a year maternity leave, and I took only 2 weeks. But uh, I think, well, academia is quite a flexible type of job, and so it's not like I was letting her do all of the work, and I was just in the lab. Uh, I was quite happy to work at nights when I wasn't sleep. Well, there's not much sleep going on in the first few months of having a kid anyway. So yeah, I would say one of the nice things about academia, which is an obvious thing to say, is it's flexible and that helps with parenting, I feel.
Yeah, brilliant. Isabella?
I was just going to add that if we're speaking of challenges navigating parenthood for the first time, it was definitely a shock to the system, which sort of Michele reminded me of, because I also only took 6 months the first time, thinking that I would be, right back at it. And of course, things are complicated, and you have no idea how it's going to impact your life and your brain and your sleep and your priorities. And no matter how many times people tell you that that's what's going to happen, you sort of never really believe it until it happens. So I guess that for me was the biggest challenge, because I was lucky enough to be in a very supportive environment otherwise. So it was just the normal things, but yeah, definitely a sort of shock that no one can prepare you for.
Yeah. Did you take the full 6 months off? I'm thinking like I can't even comprehend being able to switch off emails and not just dabble here and there for a full 6 months. But I guess that's my crazy academia brain without being a parent. Um, were you both able to do that for the full 6 months?
I mean, you kind of dabble. You always dabble. Yeah. I think I have a photo of me with my baby was 3 days old, and I had to sign a like grant submission off, and it was just like, so you still do those things, but yeah, I don't know if Michele has something to add.
Yeah, I didn't take very much time off at all. I was like always in meetings. Like I did online meetings at that point, which weren't actually even that common, believe it or not. Um, and yeah, so I didn't take very much time at all, and then ended up trying to find another job, so that had its own complications, and then interviewing. I remember going for that interview, and my husband had to take my daughter and walk her around the block, and I could hear her screaming. And I was like coming towards the end of my interview, and I was like, I really have to get back to my child. Yeah, so yeah, I completely agree that it throws you for a loop, like you just can't predict. One thing I would say is that I was super lucky in timing wise of my kids, that I had a fairly good amount of control over that. Whereas I know, I have friends and colleagues who've, taken years and years. So even when you try to time it, like, life just doesn't really work like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And Kevin, considering your experience, is there any particular challenges that you could speak to?
I guess when I had our first daughter, it was we found out my wife was pregnant maybe first month into my postdoc. And I found out because we were giving like a big call, and I was a senior in this lab, my first kind of senior position in this lab. and I was going to give a talk explaining all my work and really pumping all the PhD students and all this other stuff. I get a call from my wife, I'm pregnant. I'm like, oh, and I have to give this talk. So that was the step into the, into the whole mess, the craziness of things. I think challenges wise, I think I would say it was pretty good in terms of being supported by my PI, by people in the group. I mean, I don't know if it's a situation for everybody, but I mean, my PI had was a dad already of two kids, so there was already a sense of understanding and that kind of thing. Not everyone is so lucky with this, but I think it was good to be open. It was quite open and supportive, which is quite good. Um, I think also I do want to say parenting is sort of split up in two parts. I have my mindset. For me, it's like parenting being the first year, which is just survival. And commenting on what happened during that time, it's hard to even remember what happened because you're just surviving because you have low sleep. You're trying to essentially catch up with work meetings, trying to work, just trying to survive. And then after you settle, there's the second part, which is the parenthood of the, I guess, older kid parenthood. You deal with like organizing childcare, organizing the work life things. My daughter is now 7, so like the second year of school and organizing that school time is kind of crazy because daycare is between, like 8 to 5 almost, whereas school is between much shorter time window. So I think it's academia has been very flexible on the first part, 100%. I think more flexible than my wife has had. It's quite often in kind of corporate world where it's very hard to come back from mat leave, very hard to get part time. I think academia does a much better job in that respect. But for me, the second part, the parenthood, I think that's what drove me out of academia. So it's sort of me from the negative spin of things. Once the parenthood sort of early part finished, and me to sort of think about stability for my kids or having another kid, I couldn't see stability to do another postdoc. So already my third postdoc, and I didn't see the writing on the wall to getting a fellow to getting a permanent position, and so that kind of was one of the driving forces to actually leave academia and get into a situation where if I have to change jobs, I don't have to change cities because, as some of you may know, it's kind of easy to get a postdoc anywhere in the world, but to get it in the same city is a lot more challenging. I guess my challenges, I would say.
Definitely. I think that's something that's really front of mind for a lot of us is how mobile you need to be and how difficult it can be being mobile with a child or many children.
That's right.
Is that also something that inspired you to move over, Michelle, to industry?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So with my second child, so my daughter was in a university nursery, so the university subsidizes the nursery, and so that's really useful when you're in the nursery, but when you're in the university in a more permanent capacity. But I would find that like my on these short-term contracts, um, every time I had to kind of justify to the nursery that I was staying there. So you'd have to like prove that, you were a university employee. And my PI was amazing. Like he did everything to keep getting me more and more contracts. Um, finding money here and there. But it was just like every year to have to be doing these forms to get this university place, nursery place kept. And then she was really settled there. I just wanted to get her to get to school age. And it just eventually, came up to another contract renewal. And I just thought, I can't keep doing this really. Because I was the same as Kevin, where it's like, I'm like on my third postdoc, yeah. But with one contract that kept rolling and rolling. Um, I just couldn't see that I was going to get a fellowship or there was really any future for me. So started looking at industry. Was really lucky in a networking event to talk to some people at Cambridge Cognition. They were a spin out from Cambridge University. And that's sort of what kind of pushed me out in the end. And then also promotion wise, I have to say that I felt like I'd seen people more senior than me who had the good fellowships and things. And I wasn't completely confident that I was ever going to be one of those people who, got the positions. And Oxford obviously also is a hugely competitive place. So yeah.
And what about our current academics that have stuck around so far in the room? Can you speak to how you've managed to do that with how, I guess, transient or difficult to pin down these sorts of contracts are and um, the thought that you might have to move cities? I know that Isabella, you're sort of in the thick of it with the postdoc at the moment. Can you speak to how you're feeling around that?
Certainly. So, I guess I am sort of in the fifth year of a postdoc, but with all my time off. Um, I don't know, it's a bit shorter than that. But I have a really great boss who's sort of kind of, I think, fairly committed to keeping me on board, and he's luckily quite well funded. So I'm in a very good position there. I also only work 3 days a week, so I'm cheap, I guess. And so those things have been working in my favor. I think, though, in terms of just thinking about academia long term, I would probably be pretty stressed out if my goal was to become a professor. But at the moment, I'm sort of lucky enough to be in a position where I can take it sort of year by year. I have a partner with a very secure job. And so right now that's where I am. And I guess I'm just also very happy to pivot if I need to. So I just like hold that in my mind at all times, which I know many academics do. You just sort of wait for the funding to run out or for you to need a change. But for right now, it's working for me. So I kind of am keeping it in the right now. And maybe because my kids are, quite little still, you kind of exist in that space when they're really little. Yeah.
And it's great that you've got the flexibility.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. And Saad, how have you managed to stick around and become a professor?
Uh, I was also lucky to have support from the lab. I won't lie, before that first fellowship in 20, which started 2014, after every fellowship rejection, I was considering leaving academia, and I wasn't against that idea. I could go and work somewhere else. It was fine. But I was lucky because I got that first one, which helped me a lot. And between that one and the next one, I was able to have some bridging money from big grants I was under. So that was quite lucky. And also in terms of trying to find postdocs in other countries and mobility, etc. I was also lucky with that because my wife was working in the same place in the same kind of field, and we kind of didn't need to move to follow each other to wherever. Yeah.
It sounds like everyone's just sort of figuring it out on the fly and as it goes and constantly updating and iteratively, changing depending on the situation. You could be one grant away from staying in academia, or vice versa. So do you think that there is, and anyone can answer this, is there an optimal time in the career to become a parent in academia? I know a lot of you did it in your postdoc. I've heard of people doing it in their PhD, and then I've also heard of a lot of particularly women trying to wait until they've reached a certain tenure track role before then having kids. And I know that it's hard. Not everyone has the luxury of being able to, click their fingers and decide and plan. But did anyone have a perspective on timing and what might be optimal versus not?
I had one thing in mind, but it was nothing to do with academia or career, etc. It was about my age, and I was thinking, when I reached 30, I thought it's time for me to have a child because I want to have enough years with that child slash children to enjoy with them. So yeah, I wasn't thinking strategically there.
I will say that I think that probably goes hand in hand with career wise. Like it's the same, you have the same issues. Like if you're younger, you have more energy and you can, but you might have to work harder because you're being a parent and also working. So you have a bit baby when you're a kid when you're your PhD or undergrad, it's a bit harder. You have more energy. By the time you're in your 50s or something, you might have a kid as an adult, sort of thing. But the same thing, same conversely, if you are tenured professor already, you're more secure, you have less stresses financially and job wise. However, it's the age thing as well. I think it's this for me. I think it's the same thing, like academic or life. It's almost the same answer, the same trouble everyone else has. So, and also like whenever you're ready, think you're ready, it's still you're not ready when it's when anyway. So it's a bit crazy.
Also, with that, even if you reach a certain age slash academic stage where you're more secure financially, stress doesn't go away. There will be other sources of stress, uh, which I can cite many, but I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that I similarly I had an age thing where I was like, okay, need to get on with this. And then the other thing is that I actually, a while ago, because this was quite a common question, I did actually look at some stats. I'm going to try and find the paper, but that basically, unfortunately, if you're a woman, there is no stage at which you don't have a disadvantage. And I think that disadvantage is fairly continuous. So I remember having had a look at this and uh this was after, just because people had kept asking me. So I thought, actually, can we look at the stats to see what if there really is an optimal time? And yeah, it turned out there isn't. If you're a woman, you're always going to be negatively impacted in terms of your career, unfortunately. So that just says to me, just kind of do it whenever it works for you, really.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
And
I
also, I
agree.
mean, yeah.
Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say just to reiterate what I said earlier is that you just have so little control over these things in life that, you know, so carry on.
Yeah, no, I think there's balances and checks at every stage. Sometimes, like while I was on leave, I often thought, oh man, I wish I was more senior. So I had some students and postdocs, working on these projects and keeping them going while I was off. But at the same time, if I'd had that, then I would have had to be, in meetings more, and it probably would have been a bit more stressful to sort of maintain the lab. Whereas no one was missing me too much, which in a way was a blessing, even though the work doesn't really get done unless I do it. So yeah, definitely pros and cons to every stage. I often thought that during your PhD would be, but I feel like if you're like 18 or I don't know, even 24 during your PhD, maybe, it's not the best time. Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who so did anyone take longer than 6 months off, like a more extended period of leave? Um, and if not, just taking that 6 months off, how was that transition back to academia? Did you find it difficult? Or were you kind of chugging away during it so it was easy to get your mindset back in?
I took 6 months the first time, or maybe it was sort of 7 by the time everything got sorted. But it was really difficult. I was still so sleep deprived and not very functional at work. And I felt very guilty for not doing a good job at work from returning so early. And so the next time, even though I sort of had been dabbling, but not a lot before then. And then the second time I took a year because I just really hated that feeling of sort of not feeling like I was doing a good job anywhere. And I definitely found that experience better. It's such a luxury, though. I don't know that you get a year in many other places other than Australia. But I found that a lot easier to come back. I still sometimes struggle with those feelings of guilt, obviously, and don't feel like I'm, having a good day at work, or I'm thinking about work while I'm parenting, which I think are the same struggles for everyone. But yeah, I don't know what you would do if you didn't have the choice as to how much leave you could take. And just also to clarify, my workplace actually only offers 4 weeks paid maternity leave, but you can choose to take up to a year unpaid. So I guess and there's some government things as well. But I guess I also was choosing a financial sacrifice there, which again is something that not everyone can do. Mm-hmm.
I think the guilt is a really interesting one. And there was a question about that. How did you all navigate feeling guilty for perhaps not being as present in your work, or guilty because you're not as present at home? Did any of you experience those sorts of tensions?
I think I feel guilty all the time. Even now. I think part of being a parent is just always guilty about it. I think yeah, I think it's quite hard, at least from a dad point of view. My wife was at home, and I would often be helping out with feeds and all this sort of stuff, but I couldn't because I almost felt like I crashed on the way to work. I was so sleep deprived. And my wife was like, "You just have to go to bed, go to work," sort of thing. Um, it's very hard to deal with it, but I think it's, also part of life. If you care about work, care about, your family, that's sort of part of being human, really. It means you do care, being guilty. Dealing with it, I don't know, it's hard. It's yeah. I don't know if I can say else about that. It's just difficult.
I feel much more guilty now than I did back then. I have a group, and in fact, one person from my group was on maternity leave until recently, and the guilt is, how can I help them with their career? How can I help them publish papers and uh, get them salary for a longer period of time, etc. I think I feel it much more now than when I was a parent in 2013. I was still a kind of senior postdoc. I hired one postdoc on that fellowship, and so I didn't have that much responsibilities. And I don't remember feeling guilt at all. I just cut down on going out to the pub unless I took my son with me, and did enough work to keep the stuff going.
Yeah, I think I so I took 6 months and then 9 months. And my husband did like 2 months or so. I was in Oxford with both my kids, and they are quite generous in terms of you get like I think 6 months paid maternity leave, shared parental leave, sorry. And then you also have the government subsidized one. So that can actually, I think you can, without taking a major hit to your finances, you've got at least 9 months covered, which is really good. Oxford then also has so these are things I would definitely look at in your universities, and if you have any opportunity to advocate for it or push for it, then take a look at these things. Yeah, I saw somebody asked in the questions about the subsidized university nurseries. So Oxford has a number of university nurseries that they manage, and that you get priority in as an employee of the university to get your kids in. So that really helps because it's actually really difficult to get your kids into nursery. That's a whole other thing. Like you have to start applying for nursery places when you're like 3 months pregnant because they're so hard to get into. And then they also offered like a tax uh, uh, incentive so that you paid your nursery fees out of your employee salary. So it was like a salary deduction. So that was really useful as well. Um, uh, but yeah, nursery fees are extremely high, even with those things. Um, so definitely something to take into account for planning wise. I mean, some people end up, you know, it's not actually worth having a job because all of your salary essentially goes to nursery.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite a common problem also in Australia, how expensive childcare is. Um, and there was a quick question in the chat as well about only getting a very short period, so 6 weeks of parental leave. and whether there were any tips for how to handle quite a short period. Saad, I know that you took, I guess, did you take 2 weeks off? How did you navigate that?
Officially 2 weeks off, but obviously my workload was sacrificed in
Yeah.
so I can help at home. Uh, yeah, so I don't I don't have any particular tips. I guess it depends on your personal situation, whether you have family around that can help. I didn't being an immigrant, and my wife also being an immigrant. No. Anyone else? Some wisdom?
I suppose most of you took extended, like longer than that off, right? So it's hard to speak to that.
I think that's just it's just super tough, like especially if you're breastfeeding and like going back at with a 6-week-old baby is going to be full on, and it's just really crap that that's all you get in the US. So I'm sorry I don't have advice. I guess if there's any way you can sort of work the system, go back part-time, anything to give yourself more time, I would definitely recommend that. If you can't, I'm sure there's lots of US sort of academics, and I'd probably suggest reaching out and wondering, asking them how they made it work. I know Randy, I don't know if people know from OHBM, she had kids and then just like went straight back to work because she preferred that. And that's exactly what she wanted to do. So for some people, it really works as well.
And I suppose it's such a personal decision.
Mm-hmm.
And you may
Yeah.
also think that you need so much time off, and then when you're in the thick of it, you actually realize you want to go straight back, or you need extra time, and
Mm-hmm.
adapting as that goes, and navigating within the system that you've got. Speaking of, I guess, these conversations and the situations that you're in, how did you all find having the conversation with your supervisor or mentor to say, hey, I'm pregnant? Did you wait? Like, I've heard stories of people interviewing whilst pregnant and then revealing, a few months in, because it is your right to do so. And unfortunately, people are less likely to hire you if they know that you're pregnant. So yeah, does anyone have any experience navigating those difficult conversations? I guess, Kevin, you said that your boss at the time was a dad, very supportive. Were you
Yeah.
still a little anxious to have the chat?
I think I'll say no, just because he was a dad and I knew there was support there already. I mean, it's still an important discussion, but I felt pretty comfortable telling him. Um, I think it's a lot harder if you are the person taking the big man of leave. So that wasn't me. Um, but actually, I can speak to that a little bit as well. So when my wife went back, she couldn't get part-time, and so we had to get um, my daughter into childcare, and so we could. This is the common thing you'll find when you get kids into childcare. They won't ever offer you full days. They'll offer you maybe 2 days a week to start off with, or 3 days. It makes sense, but it happens a lot and it's crazy. So you might only get a very short amount of days when you first start off with your child. And so when that happened, she had to go back to full time, 5 days a week of work, and so did I. So what I did, I spoke to my boss, and I let out a plan, and he was pretty happy with it. I was clear with him. So what I did, I replaced my Friday with a Saturday, and my wife worked full days, and I essentially worked on the weekend instead. That was pretty flexible. It's a power of academia that you can sort of do that. Which, if you're in a situation, I really recommend it too. I mean, I was with my daughter one full day a week for like a year of her life, which was pretty awesome. She was quite young then too. So yeah, that was good to do that, and I was glad that I was there. But having that conversation really helps, being upfront and giving solutions. Like, talking about solutions, having these little extra things you can work around, like Isabella spoke about this stuff. There are little things you can work around, and flexibility in academia can help.
Yeah, I think having now left academia, I do agree. I used to think the flexibility in academia was sort of not that good on the basis that in general people were overworking themselves. So it would be like flexible, but you're like, okay, you're working like 6 or 7 days a week. That's not that flexible. But um having said that now, having had a child in academia and one out, young enough outside when I was not in as an industry, there's so many more constraints. Like I didn't have a lot of I had a lot less control over my travel. So, if I had to go to like client meetings or I had to go to certain things, then that I didn't have control over. Whereas a little bit more control over travel in academia, like what conferences you're going to go to. Maybe that's dependent on your lab as well. But there's also like meetings, like really set meetings that you just had to go to. So very frequently I would have to take meetings like on the school run. And that was really frustrating because, they're like company-wide meetings that you just can't miss. So yeah, I do think in compared to industry, there definitely is a lot more flexibility in academia. For yeah, just getting work done like different sort of hours and things. Quite often you need to be in an industry in the work hours because that's when people are doing their work. So yeah.
And did you have a good experience sharing that you were pregnant, Isabella, with your mentor or
Um,
supervisor?
yes, I'm pretty lucky. So my my poor boss has almost, well, I guess lucky him at the same time, but almost all his staff is female and like between 25 and 35. So he cops it a lot. And I think he probably has someone telling him they're pregnant every 6 months, actually. So he took it pretty well because he has to. Um, and he's also a dad, which is good. Yeah, both I have sort of two bosses, and both of them are dads. One of them wasn't at the time, but then was sort of shortly after. So we've also kind of been on the journey a little together, which has been interesting. Um, but I think, yeah, just be upfront. I think what Kevin said about going in with a plan is really great because you can say like, oh, I'm pregnant, but like I'm planning on taking 6 months off and then I want to return this. Like, how does that all sound? Is better than just being like, oh, I'm pregnant. I don't know what's going to happen. And even if you don't follow through with the plan, people just like to hear that there's a plan. Like, are you planning on returning? Just like, especially some of the contracts will expire while you're on leave. And you just have to sort of have that conversation, like, you know, will I come back? Like it can be quite complicated, but just get it all out on the table, I think. Yeah, if possible.
Yeah, being upfront and clear is the best. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like overwhelmingly from everyone, like it was a positive experience. And, supervisors and bosses are accepting. I think, I don't know why I had this fear that it would be, the be all and end all, but people do have children in academia. A lot of people have children in academia, and it sounds like navigating it is not as scary. Or it's not, you're not the first one to have a child. Like your boss has probably already experienced it and knows or supervised many people who have. So that's good to hear.
One of the best thing I heard was the director of our center at a Christmas party. She told me there's more to life than papers. And the year after I had my first child. Yes.
That's actually brilliant, Saad, because there was a question about how has being a parent changed your perspective at work and the way that you approach work. And I think
Sorry, was that a question or
that was me very poorly asking a question. So
say it again?
has it changed your perspective being a parent approaching work?
Yes, yeah, I gave you the example earlier of being more relaxed about things in general and that helping me with being interviewed by a panel and not getting too stressed and answering questions because, there's nothing more scary than being a young parent. So yeah, and I guess it helped me with prioritizing things and being perhaps a little bit more efficient with time management. And also uh, I don't know, maybe it's just time growing up and becoming a little bit more resilient to things, or is it to do with parenting? I don't know. But yeah, it's just my personality got uh, uh, yeah, overall less stressed with things. I mean, uh, there's also other things happened later on that made me even more stressed now than I used to. I wasn't going to bring it up, but since I'm about to, unfortunately, 3 years ago, my wife passed away. She died of cancer, and so now I'm a single parent, and being a single parent in academia is actually significantly tougher than being like jointly parenting in academia. So no more conference travel, just being with the child. So conferences and school don't often agree with one another. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So, so circumstances can be different for different people, and so there's no like a general rule of this is what works, this is what doesn't. Sometimes life hits you with something, and then you have to deal with it.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Saad. Michele, I see that, you've done all this wonderful work with playroom parenting. Was that influenced by being a parent?
Yeah, yeah, hugely. So when I had my first, well, my daughter, I actually found it really difficult to meet other parents. And because you end up, well, it's not meeting other parents really. It's more to do with the fact that your children need to socialize with their friends and things. And so being able to kind of meet the other parents in a nursery or kind of develop those communities, I found quite difficult. And so I started Playroom because I wanted to make it really easy for parents to connect to each other. So it's basically just an app that allows parents in a nursery to connect to each other. So if your child's in a playroom in a nursery, you can automatically be connected to all the other parents in that room. And then I started actually just using my kind of neuroscience background to help other parents. We kind of take for granted how much we understand about the brain. And even though I had this understanding about the brain, when I had my kids, actually took a while for me to click to realize that, so much of their behavior is just developmentally appropriate because their brain hasn't developed, their frontal lobes aren't developed. They don't know how to regulate emotion, all of that stuff. So I started kind of using that background to teach parents about how kids are developing. Yeah, one thing I wanted to say in terms of not necessarily the kind of talking to the supervisor about getting pregnant or anything like that. Just Isabella kind of mentioned it at the beginning that you can't really anticipate how it's going to affect you. I was always a super productive, like work all the time type of person. So I was like, gonna take 6 months, gonna work through the whole thing. Um, and my boss before my first postdoc, she's got 5 kids, neurologist and PhD and all the like, amazing woman. She said to me, just don't don't set people's expectations. So don't if you're going to take maternity leave, if you want to take 6 weeks, you don't take 1 week, don't want to take any, we want to take a year. Just don't set other people's expectations. So because you don't know how it's going to affect you. So, you get pregnant, you go, oh, don't worry about it. I'm going to take a couple of weeks. I'm going to be available all the time. I'm going to be working all of this stuff. And then you have your child, and suddenly you're like, I don't want to do any of this. I just want to spend all the time with my baby, and I just want a whole year off. Um, so I really like that advice because, yeah, I think you end up disappointing people if you set their expectations and you don't match them. Whereas if you say, hey, I'm going to take a year, and then you come back 6 months, that's great. So just, have a little bit of wiggle room in there for you because you just don't know how you're going to be impacted.
And perhaps give yourself some grace that would help with the feeling guilty bit too. It's like,
Yeah,
it's a
100%. Yeah. And I mean, a really big consideration is the fact that I don't know what the stats are, but a lot of people do end up with postpartum, right? You can end up with anxiety, depression, all kinds of things, and you can't necessarily predict it. I had very, very bad like anxiety, the worst anxiety of my entire life after I gave birth, of my first child, and that hugely, hugely impacted me as well. So yeah, definitely give yourself grace.
We've got about 7 minutes, so I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. In terms of productivity, was there anything that you found particularly helpful navigating, school drop-offs and daycare or breastfeeding? Like, how did you manage to schedule your time and still remain productive, in these, parenting years?
I have to say, calendars, and then not procrastinating, and do all these like time management things you've read about, or maybe even preach about, and do them. Like, I think for me, I totally want to be productive. And when I became a parent, there was no time, and so I couldn't faff about anything. If I set a calendar meeting, it's there. If it's not on my calendar, I don't do it. I'll forget about it. If you don't send me an invite, I won't do it. So that's, you might in the audience have postdocs and then see your supervisors go crazy about calendars. That's the reason why it's time for you to be structured in that way. That's the thing I definitely think you should do.
I think I still am really working on this, and I struggle with focus quite a lot. I'm not that good at compartmentalizing my life, but I think if I was better, that would help a lot. But in general, I think a lot of the stuff we do doesn't need to be done, and so you cut it out. Like, um, you know, I don't spend as much time on email. I don't like I don't review as many papers as I would have before. Um, so the things that, like, you hit your baseline for what you need to do, how many papers you need to review in the year to feel like, you're contributing, and then you don't do anymore. Or, this, I was in the SIG, which was awesome. But now I know, I'm going to have to take a couple years off of being heavily involved in some of these extra organizations. So that's sort of been one strategy, but I am really working on it. So any other tips anyone has, I'm interested in.
I feel like it could be an opportunity to uh, do something different, learn a new skill, read papers you don't usually read, something like that. It's part of the job, learning things, but it's an underappreciated part of the job because we spend our time reading emails. And so it could be like a light relief, but actually a useful thing to do in the long run.
Mm.
I think the most productive I've ever been was during COVID. Um, we had to, particularly when the nurseries were like everything was shut down. So we were looking after my daughter, and I had a son as well. Um, my husband and I would split the workday 4 hours, 4 hours. So you just got 4 dedicated hours. And I was so productive because I think I wrote like 5 papers, something ridiculous because that was the only time I had to work. So I sat down for that 4 hours and it was completely intensive, and that was it. So yeah, and then since then, I mean, I agree. I'm similar where if I don't have an invitation for something, it doesn't exist. I do things that one thing I always found interesting was that when I was a postdoc or kind of earlier in my career, the lead up to things took a lot longer. And like if I was preparing a presentation, it would take that much longer. And then I really started to understand why you see those, profs in the audience, they're going up onto the big stage and they're doing their slides right there, or they're doing it on the plane. Because you just don't worry so much. You just don't have time. So something has to be done. It's done, that helps a lot.
Nice. We just get it done. And I think it would be nice to finish on, if there's any advice that you could give to, past you about parenting, whether that be, you know, practical or emotional, what advice would you give? I know you're in the thick of it, Isabella, but is there anything you would say to your past self?
Uh, I guess, well, someone else said this to me, and I guess I'm grateful. Um, but that there's sort of like a time and place to be a certain version of yourself. And you don't know how you feel about parenting, but if you love it and you want to take the time to be there, take the time. Your career will figure itself out. If you don't love being at home all day with a baby, then that's okay and go for it too. So I think you really can't predict the type of parent you'll be. Find someone who is maybe a similar type of parent who's done what you want to do, and talk to them. And so that was someone for me. I really love being with my girls, and taking the time off. And I've had academics that say just like put them in daycare, get on with your work. But then someone else said, you know what, like now might not be the time for your big career push. And that really resonated with me more. So I guess find your person, find your parenting person, find your parenting style. But unless you're a parent, you probably don't know yet. So
Yeah, that's brilliant. And Saad, do you want to, I know that you have to run off. So what are your thoughts?
What would I say to myself back in the days? 2012, 2013, I would have said buy a house. Because a year or two later, they went poof through the roof, and it was impossible after that. I mean, it was possible, but it was much, much more expensive. My wife said, let's deal with the pregnancy first, and then we can buy a house. And then it was too late.
Okay, great. So let's all go buy houses. Thank you. What about you, Kevin?
Um, Probably an emotional thing that it'll all work itself out. Whatever life comes at you, just deal with it, and it'll be fine. That's probably what I'll say to myself. I don't even think else more inspirational to say, but it's all right. Tell myself not to stress out so much.
Hmm. I think that's a good reminder. And Michelle?
Yeah, I think really that you don't have to do all the stuff at the same time. Like it really is incredible how that like having it all thing is ingrained. Well, was in me, and I had to just yeah, I don't have to be all the things at the same time. Like there gets to a point where I didn't read a book for like about 6 years. And now I read constantly because my kids are okay to play on their own and I do get time to myself a bit more. And yeah, just really realize that you definitely, as Kevin said, you go through this sort of like survival mode of like, you're just gonna have to get through that stuff and you might not write 20 papers in that time period. That's okay. Just get through that period. There's time
Yeah, but it's a
to do the
wonderful
other
period,
things.
isn't it? It's really wonderful to see this tiny little thing grow, etc. I don't see it as survival mode at all. I mean, some of it is tough, but a lot of it is joy, isn't it?
Yes. Oh my God. That is another thing, I think you sometimes always hear the bad things about parenting, right? Because they're really easy to say that you're really tired, that it's really tough. But there's this whole other side that's really hard to articulate, which is just phenomenally wonderful and amazing.
Yes, that is true. I will say that it's wonderful and amazing. I say survival mode because you're in the thick of it, you have this two schools of like, I'm tired, what is this? And also this is amazing. So it's a funny sort of thing to have. Yeah. So that's a
And
good point
sometimes
to bring up. So
yeah, if your kids don't sleep, it like genuinely is survival mode. Like my kids would just not, we're at 7 and 4 and we only every like 6 months get a full night where both are asleep. So some of it is just trying to stay awake.
But I think that's a wonderful, wonderful spot to finish on is that it is so joyous and wonderful and crazy, but also spectacular. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experiences. This has been really, really, really wonderful hearing all your insights. And I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you everyone for joining us online, and I think we'll wrap things up there.
Thanks for organizing, Erin.
Yes,
Yes,
thank
thank you,
Thank
Erin.
you.
Bye.
See ya.
everyone.
Yeah, everyone's free to reach out to me if you want